Hi everyone. So, we're continuing our series of ranking videos, this time looking at Arrows. Arrows were a long-standing team that were known for doing things on the fly and went through several changes of leadership and a complete name change. They endured for over 20 years and achieved 1 pole position, 1 fastest lap and 9 podium finishes, but never won a race. Their final stint under the leadership of Tom Walkinshaw became known for their stunning liveries, which are still adored to this day. So, without further ado, here's a comprehensive ranking of all 24 Arrows and Footwork Formula 1 cars. So, the worst Arrows from 1986 is the A9. The A9 was introduced midway through 1986, at the peak of the turbo era, as a replacement for the A8, which had been used reasonably successfully since the start of the previous season, and it was the first Arrows of a carbon composite chassis. Thierry Boutsen and Christian Danner took turns in it. However, after 3 races it was dropped as it broke down in all 3 of them, and the team's chief designer Dave Wass then quit the team. They attempted to fit the front end of the A9 to the A8 for a couple of races, but eventually switched back to the A8 as it was. In 23rd, from 1991, is the Footwork FA12. In 1990, Japanese businessman Wataru Ohashi bought a large stake in Arrows, and the following year it was renamed Footwork Arrows. The team started running Porsche V12s and brought in Alan Jenkins as their new technical director. The car arrived 2 races late as the engine was too large to fit onto the bodywork. After 4 races, Michele Alboreto, Alex Caffey and Stefan Johansson had all either failed to qualify or failed to finish a race. So Porsche walked away and the team acquired better fitting Ford V8s, and the car was rebadged as the FA12C. This however made little difference, and Caffey started failing to pre-qualify. He did eventually qualify for the final 2 races and gave the team their best result of 10th, though they were still a net 17th in the Constructors' Championship. In 22nd, from 1982, is the Arrows A5. The A5 was a development car brought in for the final 3 rounds to help the team with the design of the A6, where ground effects would be banned. Mauro Baldi and Mark Sura took turns in the car and managed to finish all 3 races with a best result of 7th from Sura at Caesars Palace. In 21st, from 1979, is the Arrows A2. The A2 was introduced midway through 1979 as a replacement for the hastily built A1, but proved to be worse. The large Venturi tunnels, facilitated by angling the engine and gearbox, produced massive amounts of downforce, but the handling was appalling due to the high centre of gravity. Riccardo Patrese didn't have much success, and Jochen Mass scored 2 points but also failed to qualify for 2 races, which left them 9th in the Constructors' Championship. The first car to break the top 20 is the team's final car, from 2002, the Arrows A23. Under Tom Walkinshaw's leadership, Arrows were on their 5th different engine in 6 years, now running Cosworth V10s. Money was starting to run out after 3 years of Orange sponsorship, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Enrique Benoldi scored 2 points amongst a sea of retirements and disqualifications, and deliberately failed to qualify at the French Grand Prix in order to save engine mileage. After the following race, the team went insolvent and shut up shop. The A23 found a new lease of life, however, as it was acquired by Paul Stoddart of Minardi and served as the base chassis of the Minardi PS04 and PS04B, and then also the Super Aguri SA05 and SA06. In 19th, from 1984, is the Arrows A7. Arrow's first turbocharged car used a BMW inline 4, the same engine being used very successfully by Brabham. However, they were being supplied and maintained by Swiss engineer Heini Marder, and as well as having about 100 less horsepower than the Brabham's engines, also broke down a lot more often. It wasn't until the halfway mark of the season that Thierry Boutsen and Mark Sura were both driving the car, and they broke down in more than half the races they entered, but showed the car had potential with a 5th and a 6th in Austria, leaving them 11th in the Constructors' Championship. In 18th, from 1999, is the Arrows A20. After a miserable 1998, Tom Walkinshaw tried to change things up for 1999, which included replacing technical director John Barnard with Mike Coughlin. The transitional nature of the car was exemplified with its 2-tone livery in between the jet black of the A19 and the bright orange of the A21. Pedro de la Rosa scored a point at the opening round in Australia, but beyond this he and Teranosuke Takagi scored no further points amidst constant breakdowns from their dodgy in-house Hart engines, and only beat newcomers BAR to 9th in the Constructors' Championship. In 17th, from 2001, is the Arrows A22. The A22 was virtually the same as the A21, aside from new suspension and the Supertech engines being replaced with Asia Techs. A deliberately small fuel tank meant Jos Verstappen and Enrique Bernoldi often made big gains in the opening stints of races, but it only amounted to a single point from Verstappen. A strange-looking elevated front wing reminiscent of the first front wing designs of the 1960s was added at Monaco and immediately banned for safety reasons in a time long before the halo, and the team ended up 10th in the Constructors' Championship. In 16th, from 1996, is the Footwork FA17. This was the final Footwork car as the team was bought out at the start of the season by Tom Walkinshaw, and it was essentially a throwaway year in their preparations for 1997. Jos Verstappen scored a single point from the 4 races he managed to finish, often either breaking down or crashing, and Ricardo Rossit was less reckless but much slower, leaving them 9th in the Constructors' Championship. In 15th, from 1998, is the Arrows A19. Legendary engineer John Barnard was recruited by Tom Walkinshaw for 1998. He also decided to build in-house engines designed by Brian Haas in order to save costs, but it wasn't particularly effective and Barnard's carbon fibre gearbox did not mesh well either. A year full of breakdowns for these distinctive jet black cars was saved by a 4th and a 6th from Mika Salo and Pedro Diniz at the non-power dependent Monaco and a 5th from Diniz at the chaotic Belgian Grand Prix. Barnard and Hart both left at the end of the year, but they managed to clinch 7th in the Constructors' Championship. In 14th, from 1995, is the Footwork FA16. The FA16 was a good chassis, but with substandard Hart engines. Gianni Morbidelli got a 6th place at Canada and was then replaced by Max Papis, but after his return he got a sensational 3rd at the final round in Australia. Taki Inoue, on the other hand, wasn't particularly fast and was also magnetised to the safety car, being struck by it both in and out of the car, and with Morbidelli's 5 points they finished 8th in the Constructors' Championship. In 13th, from 1994, is the Footwork FA15. The FA15 was not much different from the FA16, aside from having Ford engines instead of Hart. There were still a lot of retirements, particularly in the first half of the season, but Christian Fittipaldi and Gianni Morbidelli were able to get 9 points between them, but they still finished 9th in the Constructors' Championship. In 12th, from 2000, is the Arrows A21. This was the first Arrows to run their iconic orange sponsorship. It was a complete redesign from the previous car and was clearly a solid one as it broke the lap record at Barcelona in pre-season testing. Pedro de la Rosa and Jos Verstappen both enjoyed driving the car as it handled well and it excelled at high-speed, low-downforce tracks such as Monza and the Hockenheimring. However, as with many of their other cars, it was let down by a substandard gearbox and engine. There were just 3 double finishes across the year, none of which saw any points. They did, however, score points elsewhere, all at circuits with long straights, and finished 7th in the Constructors' Championship. In 11th, from 1997, is the Arrows A18. This was the first car under the team's guise as TWR Arrows. Frank Durney came in as technical director, and they were running Yamaha engines. As ever, the car had little to no reliability, and the only saving grace was that the team had acquired defending champion Damon Hill. Once the team were on top of the car, he drove well, and qualified 3rd at Hungary and was set to win the race until a hydraulic failure got the car stuck in 3rd gear, but he still finished 2nd. Teammate Pedro Diniz saw the points only once himself, and they finished 8th in the Constructors' Championship. The first car to break the top 10, from 1982, is the Arrows A4. Dave Wass's first car for Arrows was initially fairly weak. In the first 3 races, Brian Henton and Mauro Baldi each failed to qualify twice. As with many other FOCA teams, they boycotted the San Marino Grand Prix and then replaced Henton with Mark Surer. From here on, their fortunes improved drastically, and top 10 finishes became a regular occurrence. Baldi still twice more failed to qualify, but they scored 5 points and finished 11th in the Constructors' Championship. In 9th, from 1993, is the Footwork FA14. The FA14 was introduced 3 races into the season. Performance was fairly inconsistent. The car was more reliable than normal, but Derek Warwick and Aguri Suzuki had quite a few accidents. However, Warwick was able to score 4 points and gave the team 9th in the Constructors' Championship. In 8th is Arrow's first car, from 1978, the FA1. Arrow's first car was not technically their car, but was rather just a rebadged Shadow DN9. The formation of Arrow's Grand Prix International was a last-minute move by a handful of former Shadow employees. Tony Southgate designed the car believing he owned the intellectual property rights to it as he was a consultant with Shadow rather than an employee. So midway through the season, Shadow took Arrows to court and their cars were destroyed and replaced with a hastily built A1. In race trim, the car was very solid. Rolf Stommelen struggled a bit and failed to qualify at Brands Hatch, but Riccardo Patrese got 2 sixth places and finished second in Sweden behind the equally illegal Brabham BT46B fan car, which helped them to 10th in the Constructors' Championship. In 7th is Arrow's first true car, from 1978, the A1. The A1 was designed and built in less than 2 months following the legal action over the FA1. Its rushed nature meant Riccardo Patrese failed to finish the first 3 races and Rolf Stommelen failed to pre-qualify for each of them. Patrese salvaged the year with a 4th place at Canada, and the car was then used in the first half of 1979. They had time to refine the design, and it worked far better, as it was reliable and fast. Patrese and Jochen Mass regularly finished in the top 10, and at the car's final race in Monaco, Jochen Mass was on course for 3rd until brake issues dropped him to 6th. It was then replaced with the radical but worse A2, and was brought back once at Canada and helped the team to 9th in the Constructors' Championship. In 6th, from 1989, is the Arrow's A11. The A11 was Arrow's first post-turbo era car. It was competitive as Derek Warwick, Eddie Cheever and Martin Donnelly got several points finishes between them, and Cheever managed to finish 3rd in Phoenix. There were still a few breakdowns, and Cheever twice failed to qualify, but they scored 13 points and finished 7th in the Constructors' Championship. A B-spec model was used in 1990, but it was now becoming outdated, and Michele Alboreto, Alex Caffey and Bernd Schneider several times failed to qualify. However, when they did qualify, they still regularly finished in the top 10, but only scored points once, leaving them 9th in the Constructors' Championship. After the team's disorganised takeover by Footwork, it was used for the first 3 races of 1991, now well past its sell-by date, rebadged as a Footwork A11C, and only once qualified before being replaced with the far worse FA12. In 5th, from 1992, is the Footwork FA13. Arrow's second year as Footwork was miles better than their first. The mediocre Porsche V12 and Ford V8 engines of the previous car were replaced with a Mugen Honda V10. With this, mechanical retirements were very rare, which meant Michele Alboreto and Aguri Suzuki almost always finished in the top 10. Despite this, Suzuki failed to score any points, and Alboreto amassed 6, but with the modern points system they would have scored 97, and finished 7th in the Constructors' Championship. A B-spec model was used for the first 2 races of 1993 before it was replaced with the slightly worse FA14. In 4th, from 1983, is the Arrow's A6. Arrows had now got into a stride in 1983. The A6 proved to be extremely reliable, and Mark Sura scored points in 3 of the first 4 races. Himself, Chico Serra, Alan Jones and Thierry Boutsen scored no other points that year, but were regularly in the top 10 and finished 10th in the Constructors' Championship. It was used in tandem with the far worse turbocharged A7 for the first half of 1984, and Boutsen then twice scored points which helped them to 10th in the Constructors' Championship once again. In 3rd, from 1980, is the Arrow's A3. The radical A2 did not work so well for Arrows, so with the A3 they went for a much more conventional design. The season started strongly, as in the first 6 races Riccardo Patrese and Jochen Mass got 4 points finishes, and Patrese finished 2nd at Long Beach. There were no further points in the remainder of the season, and Mike Thackwell and Manfred Winkelhock were brought in, but both failed to qualify, but they still finished 7th in the Constructors' Championship. The car was used again for 1981, driven by Patrese and Siegfried Storr. Patrese got pole position at Long Beach but then retired in the race, and then finished 3rd at Interlagos and 2nd at Imola, proving the year-old car was still competitive. Storr and then Jacques Villeneuve Sr. both failed to qualify several times, and reliability was a bit shaky, but Patrese had got 2 podiums in a season for the first time, though they still dropped to 8th in the Constructors' Championship. In 2nd, from 1985, is the Arrow's A8. Arrow's second year with temperamental turbocharged BMW engines was far better than their first. Amidst 4 straight retirements for Gerhard Berger at the start of the season, Thierry Boutsen got a 2nd place at Imola. After this, they had regular top 10 finishes but few points until scoring points in the final 3 rounds, including a 5th and a 6th in South Africa, which gave them 8th in the Constructors' Championship. It was used again in 1986, with Berger replaced with Mark Sura and then Christian Danner. Danner scored a single point amongst several top 10 finishes around the time they were planning to transition over to the disastrous A9, but it was still reasonably reliable, and the single point gave them 10th in the Constructors' Championship. And finally, in 1st, from 1987, is the Arrow's A10. After Dave Wass walked away midway through 1986, he was replaced with a young Ross Brawn. Arrows secured a deal to keep using their difficult turbocharged BMW engines despite BMW withdrawing from the sport. The team struggled for several races with the turbo's pop-off valve inhibiting engine power and fuel consumption, but Brawn had assigned an aerodynamically sound car, and despite a lot of retirements the car was clearly very fast, which meant Derek Warwick and Eddie Cheever scored points almost every time they finished and ended up 7th in the Constructors' Championship. A B-spec model was used in 1988, still running a turbo engine while most other teams had switched to naturally aspirated power. The reliability issues of the engine could often be overcome by the massive power advantage, meaning they scored points even more regularly. After they finally rectified the issues with the pop-off valve and turbo lag in slow corners, they went on a run of 3 points finishes in a row, including a 3rd and a 4th at Monza after topping the speed trap. They ended the year with 3 consecutive retirements, but had still scored 23 points, more than double the previous year, and finished a record 5th in the Constructors' Championship. And as such, I can declare it the greatest Arrows Formula 1 car of all time. That's all for this video. Let me know if you disagree with the order and would like to see any other teams' cars ranked. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Brook_F1, and I'll see you all next time.